I'm Walter Isaacson, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Bruce Katz. Bruce is the co-author of the forthcoming book, The Metropolitan Revolution. It's not only a book, it's something I keep wanting to do and haven't done yet. It's an awesome iPad app. I've just looked at it this morning. If you go to the App Store and just, I guess, type in Metropolitan Revolution, you will find it. It has interviews and pictures and beautiful things. Bruce is at the Brookings Institution. And almost the theme of this week has been the optimism that many people feel compared to the past few years. That optimism is coming in a few ways, partly because of America's energy innovation, but it's also partly because of America's urban innovation. And I'll just start by giving my own personal background, why I love this book too. I come from New Orleans. Some of you probably saw me with Mitch Landrieu yesterday at the panel at Greenwald. And we remember, 6, 7 years ago when Katrina hit, thinking it would be impossible for the city to come back. Mitch and I lived in Broadmoor. We were both, our homes, family homes, under about 8.5 feet of water. And I thought, it will never come back. But if you want to understand the resilience of America, I think where you look is in its urban areas. I happen to have as our chairman of the board of the Aspen Institute, Bob Steele, who's the deputy mayor of the city of New York, and he has been at the forefront of leading the urban renaissance along, I would say, with Mitch Landrieu. So this book is incredibly timely. I think it's not quite out, but it may be available here.
It came out about a week ago.
Oh, so it is available in the bookstore here. For those of you who don't know, we have a bookstore in the Pepka building, that big room right when you come in. And knowing Bruce, he will sign copies if you pay cash money, even if you buy it on credit. So with that, let me introduce Bruce and say, tell us a little bit about why you call it a revolution.
Sure. I don't think there's any secret in this room that our country faces some huge competitive and social challenges, but Jennifer Bradley and I see something very exciting happening around the country at a time when the federal government, for all intents and purposes, has left the building. Cities and metropolitan areas are stepping up, and they're doing the hard work to grow jobs and make their places more prosperous. They're investing in infrastructure. They're making manufacturing a priority again because of this energy revolution. They're equipping workers with the skills they need. They're integrating immigrants into the economic mainstream. Our book tells stories about LA and Denver and Houston and Portland, New York City for sure because of Bob's work, but also Detroit and Cleveland, places that have had some tough times but are doing some smart things. This is happening because our cities and metropolitan areas are really powerful economies. The top 100, there are about 388. They sit on only 1/8 of the landmass. They're 2/3 of the population, 3/4 of the GDP, and on every single indicator that powers economies, skilled workers, patents, R&D, infrastructure. They're 75, 80, 85, 90% of the national share. So what we say in this book is, there really is no American economy. What we really have is a network of metropolitan economies. And I think over the next decade, Walter, I think what's going to happen is change is going to happen primarily where people live as networks of leaders come together to do grand things together.
Last year at Ideas Festival, Richard Florida, who you know well, who's a theorist of the creative class, says that it's the influx of the creative class into places from Portland, like you write about, to New York City, that's driving the renaissance of the inner cities. Right or wrong?
I think Richard's right, but I think that's only one of the things happening right now. Because we do have changing demographic preferences of young workers, and that's what Richard is writing about with the creative class. I see some dramatic changes in innovation and the spatial geography of innovation coming from companies. 40 years ago, if you wanted to find the innovative American economy, get in a car and drive 30 miles out to the Research Triangle Park, right? 7,000 acres of
Route
former
128, Silicon Valley Research Triangle.
And I think what's happening now is corporations in a growing number of sectors are saying, we've got to be near other companies doing similar things. Our workers need to be engaging with workers in other firms. So there's a benefit of density that we see
that's
happening.
a really odd thing because we thought 20, 30 years ago that the digital revolution would allow us to live anywhere on the grid and that we could all telecommute and do things. And we used to have a drinking game at Aspen, or at least the staff did, which is whenever anybody quoted Tom Friedman saying the world is flat, they used to get a shot at tequila. They were drunk by the afternoon because everybody said you can live anywhere. The world is flat. Yeah. We've learned the world is spiky.
The world is spiky. I'm feeling a little woozy right now.
Yeah. But the world is spiky because in the end, people like to cluster in the heart of New Orleans, the heart of Portland, the heart of New York City. They don't like to
basically move to the periphery. I mean, I think we are social animals, and there's a chapter of this book that's called The Rise of Innovation Districts. Because again, in the late 20th century, we really thought about science parks being the quintessential geography of innovation. And now what we're seeing is clusters of firms, but also residential retail amenities coming around our anchor institutions, our higher ed institutions, medical campuses. Rip Rapson is here from Detroit. It's happening in Midtown Detroit.
Yeah, talk about Detroit. Where's Rip?
Right over here.
Where's your hand? Oh, there, right there. I talk about Detroit, because that's one that and with all due respect, what we thought would be the toughest nut to crack.
Well, I think Detroit is really a tale of two cities. Mm-hmm. And there's one city you read about in the paper every day now because of the fiscal stress and, you know, obviously the issues around bankruptcy. But there's another Detroit. The city's 138 square miles. In the core of 5 square miles, the downtown, the old Woodward corridor up to the Midtown, what you see are philanthropic and business leaders making a bet on a very innovative future, because that's where their anchors are, that's where their assets are. They sit along the Detroit River. Canada is to the south of Detroit. There are clusters of tech and creative firms populating the downtown. And then when you move into Midtown Detroit, you've got Wayne State, you've got Henry Ford Health System, you've got Detroit Medical Campus, you've got the College for Creative Studies, you've got small batch manufacturing, and you've got philanthropic leaders like Rip that are pooling their resources, right, to basically catalyze a market. So you've got to look under the surface, really, to see the true city, the true metropolis in America. And what I generally see happening around this country is just affirmative energy, pragmatism.
Right. The Aspen Institute, along with Mayor Bloomberg Philanthropies, right, is going to do a creative, a cities conference called City Lab, October 5th and 6th in downtown Manhattan. Hope any of you want to come, be there, and I hope Bruce will be there. But would you explain the strategy that Bob Steele and Mike Bloomberg used to revive New York?
Sure. So picture this, the beginning of the recession, New York City is rocked, and Mayor Bloomberg and his team convene literally hundreds of business, civic, university leaders and say, we've got to diversify our economy. We need a game changer here because we cannot be so reliant on financial services. What they came up with was the Applied Science District, but also really a network of applied science campuses all around the city. Bob Steele really led this effort.
Jillian Steele is here, so I'll embarrass her. So let's not say anything bad about Bob.
Yeah. Well, this is, and you can see Bob in our app talking about what we did. But I think what this is a bet on the future. It's our major global metropolis basically saying we've got to set a platform for the next 30, 50 years of growth by attracting world-class universities, Cornell and Technion, to our city, putting about $100 million, $130 million down in infrastructure, but then basically leveraging $2 billion in private capital as the universities build, expected $33 billion in private investment over the next several decades, 50,000 jobs, 1,000 startups. New York is becoming the tech center in addition to being the financial center.
Why did Silicon Valley, which is not an urban area, become the, for 25 years, let's say, the epicenter of innovation?
You've got Stanford, right? You've got enormous federal R&D flowing into Silicon Valley, initially off of defense, but increasingly off of health and energy. And then you've got an ecosystem. It really is about entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs, but then companies, universities, institutions that specialize in capital and marketing and branding, institutions that specialize in skilling workers. You can attract workers from abroad, but you also have to grow from within. So Silicon Valley is the quintessential ecosystem in the United States for innovation, but frankly, Walter, what's happening now is a lot of workers want to be in San Francisco.
Right.
They want to be in Oakland. They want to get out of their company and get on a bike and, ride along the river or do their daily errands. I think Silicon Valley is going to have to urbanize. I think to
Well, no, I mean, I think one of the great moves we're seeing is the migration out of Silicon Valley to places where really creative people want to live. I know this
Right.
is sort of in your book, it's many others, but that's why you see the migration to San Francisco. But that's what New York offers, is the connection of engineering to the creative industries, i.e. fashion, journalism, media, whatever. Is that a trend you see happening?
So we put out a report at Brookings several weeks ago around the STEM economy, and we called it the hidden STEM economy in the United States: science, technology, engineering, math. And in the past, we used to think about this economy as like 4% dominated by the brainiacs, really, from MIT and Stanford and Georgia Tech and so forth. What we now realize is that this economy is about 20% of our economy. And a large number of the jobs can be filled by people coming out of high school and community colleges with technical skills customized to the clusters in their places. And it's not just about the ideas we generate, it's about production, it's about manufacturing, it's the interplay of production and innovation. We forgot that in the United States for a while. We sort of had this vision of the post-industrial Facebook economy. Actually, we have enormous assets in this country around aerospace, around automotive, around high precision instruments, anything that needs quality and that interplay between innovation, idea generation, and ultimately production. That's where we need to be.
Let me add another industry, which is a very urban-centric one, which is life sciences.
Sure.
How is that driving the urban?
Well, you
metropolitan
see it in places in MIT, obviously. I mean, Cambridge is just bursting at the seams, really.
Yeah, by the way, Eric Lander, who runs the MIT Harvard Institute on, that sequence the genome, is on campus. Don't miss him, because really that is driving, for Boston at least, the highest per capita of hospitals.
Absolutely.
With the highest per capita of really smart biologists, a new urban revolution.
I mean, it may be the most innovative mile in the United States, because you've got Cambridge, you've got Harvard, you've got Longwood Medical, you've got other hospitals. And I think what we need to understand is the demographics, right? The aging tsunami in the United States, and how this country needs to crack the code on many of the serious issues we face around aging, not just health, but urbanism. I mean, how do we begin to house an older population when we've been a suburban nation, even an exurban nation, right? So there are some really hard issues to sort of grapple with, but I think it's that interplay of advanced research, entrepreneurialism, close connection to community and civic activism. That's the network of cities and metro. They're not governments. Federal government is a government. States are governments. Cities and metropolitan areas are networks of leaders and institutions. That's why they're so powerful.
People talk about the great influx to the city, the revitalization of the core. Is that really happening? Do we have facts and statistics?
Absolutely. The recession was really a break point here, because the exurbs really were growing by leaps and bounds pre-recession. I mean, pre-recession, we really had an economy characterized by consumption and debt, and exurban home building.
By pre-recession, you mean before 2001 or 2008?
2008. Yeah. I mean, it was home building on steroids and sprawl on steroids. It's almost like the Great Recession stopped the fever, and it really said to us, we got to get back to some fundamentals here, right? Fundamentals about what drives an economy, production, innovation.
But give me, because there's some people argue against it, although I think they're wrong. But you have actual facts that the exurban and suburban flood has stopped, and coming back in has now overtaken that.
And I would say, well, all Brookings is about facts. I guess Richard Haas is here, right? I mean, what we do.
Richard is a competitor of Brookings.
No, but we're friends, right? We're cities. We collaborate to compete. But at Brookings, what we try to do is drill down into each of the top 100 metros and show their demographic trends and their economic trends and their environmental trends. Yes, there is a major shift in settlement patterns in the United States underway. And frankly, I don't think it's just about cities. right, central cities. I think it's around a lot of older suburbs that are urbanizing. You know, think Bethesda, think Arlington,
Right.
think Silver Spring.
And they now have all of a sudden a town center, which
So
they
they're
didn't
creating,
have before.
exactly.
There's a great, not a great debate, a minor debate in your industry, if I'm right, between Joel Kotkin on
Yeah.
one hand and put Richard Florida on the
Sure.
other extreme. Explain that and where do you stand?
Well, you know, I think Richard, and you know, in a country
Richard
of,
Florida wrote The Creative Class. Joel
right.
Kotkin sort of celebrates the suburbs.
he sort of celebrates the suburbs, and he celebrates a different set of cities that, you know, Richard can always, well, and again, these are sort of cartoons, really, right? So Richard will celebrate Austin and Denver and Portland and Seattle and Boston, and Joel will celebrate a lot of suburban counties in places like Los Angeles and elsewhere. You know, in some ways, they're both right. And again, in a country of 315 million, sometimes you have to really take a stark stance to have anyone hear anything. But the key competitive unit of this economy is the metropolis. It's not the city. It's not the suburb, older or newer. It's not the exurb. It's not even the rural periphery. It's that one commuter shed, labor market, housing market. We're not organized governmentally like that, but we're organized economically like that. And so we try to stay above the Richard Joel sort of food fight and say, let's just focus on the facts of these metropolitan areas. And also let's focus on how to think about unifying the narrative between cities. We don't need more divisions between cities and suburbs. What we need are places coming together at a time when the federal government is mired in partisan gridlock, forming networks across jurisdictions and sectors, setting a distinct vision, and finding their game changer. That's what we need. So I think these observations are very helpful. We agree with many of them, but we come together with more of a unified narrative that can hopefully catalyze action.
Can cities come back if K through 12 schools don't get better?
You know, I think we need a much bigger conversation about how we're educating our children in this country, because we seem to have adopted, and it's part of the post-industrial economy narrative, that every child needed to be on a 4-year or a track to a 4-year degree. That does not serve our economy. That does not serve millions of our children. We talk about in the book the notion of race to the shop. The president is race to the, remember shop? I wasn't very good at shop, but in any event, I totally validate people who are. Again, this gets back to this notion that there are millions of jobs in our economy, particularly as we see production reshoring, particularly as we see technology permeating so many sectors of our economy. We need to get our kids prepared for that. I see the optimism, frankly, around the country of city after city setting up special academies that sort of flow into their business clusters. In fact, the curriculum is really set by business. The courses are almost
Give me some examples.
Well, in West Austin, so this is about, if anyone's from here, from Chicago, it's about 20 minutes. There's Austin Polytech. Children coming into this school, and if you know the Austin neighborhood, it's about 98% African American. They're coming in with 3rd grade reading, they're coming in with 5th grade math, and by the time they leave after 4 years in Austin Polytech, they have credentials to go into a factory, earning as welders, right, $50,000 a year. They can go on to community college, they can go on to 4-year if they want, but we got to get back to this.
Manufacturing is going to come back to cities. The reshoring is going to continue.
We've got 3D imaging. We've got a lot of disruption in manufacturing happening right now, but we do see already a reshoring of production. It's fueled a lot of the recovery to date. We can't just think about this as the United States. We should really also think about Canada and Mexico and those relationships. No, but I don't have any doubt that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see new jobs, manufacturing jobs, and then the retirement of industrial workers who need to be replaced. We can do that out of our inner city schools. We can do that out of some of our troubled older suburban schools. We need to get focused, and I think the focus is at the local and metropolitan level.
Let's assume somebody from some city, and I'll pick one, Kansas City, Missouri, calls you in and says, we've been late to this new game.
Sure.
Tell us what to do.
Well, the first thing, and we do a lot of work in Kansas City, so the first thing is...
Yeah, I'm not clueless.
No. And I love Kansas City. So First question, what's your network? Okay, because I can pretty much tell in 15 minutes what kind of city I'm in, because you'll go to a business leader, and if he or she talks up the elected official, you begin to get a sense, okay, they're working together. You go to the elected official, if he or she talks up the head of the university, and then so on, so on, so on.
Interesting.
So what's your network, right? Government can't do it by itself. Companies can't do it by itself. Universities clearly can't do it by themselves. So what's the network that you can pull together of leaders, but also other entrepreneurs, other innovators within your metropolis? Second, what's your distinctive vision? You know, what makes Kansas City hum, right, is really different than what makes Denver prosperous or competitive, or obviously Detroit or Boston. So what's your special role? And I think Kansas City has many special roles, transportation and logistics being just two of them. And the other piece then, what's your game changer? You know, in our book, the game changer in New York City was applied science. The game changer in Denver was a state-of-the-art transit system, the largest light rail system in the world. Right. LA, transit, Houston, immigration, Portland, exports. So what's your game changer? You don't need to copy anyone else. You need to build from what is distinctively your special assets.
And Kansas City?
I think Kansas City, I mean, look, I think the uniform game changer gets to what you said, which is, can we have K through 12 function for children, particularly in deprived neighborhoods, and can we get them on a whole set of disparate tracks so that they can find their place in a rapidly changing, technologically driven economy?
But for Kansas City, you got the jurisdictional problem writ large, because you even have two states. I mean, if people don't like Kansas City, Missouri, they can cross the river.
Right. You can fall out of bed in the other side, basically. Yeah. You know, I think for a long time, it's also good to maybe just sort of juxtapose Kansas City and Denver.
Right.
Right? They're both in the middle of the country for all intents and purposes. Denver has made a bet. Well, granted, it's within one state, but it's made a bet and it's worked hard on regional collaboration. Right. That started around culture and arts. It extended out to the airport. Now it's around light rail and transit. We just finished an effort with Governor Hickenlooper on advanced space, so trying to find their role in the advanced industry. You know, my sense with Kansas City is with many other metros, get over it. Mm-hmm. No one's coming to your rescue. The fact that you're divided by 2 state lines or 3 state lines, that's life, you know? I mean, in this world, you're just gonna have to basically realize you're on your own for all intents and purposes, and it's within your powerful metropolis that you've got to find the way forward, the way to get past these artificial divisions. The economy is completely unified. It's just these political jurisdictions.
Somebody once said that if you want to build a great city, build a great university and wait 400 years, right?
I don't know that.
And I mean, when New Orleans had to come back, it wouldn't have come back if it had not been for Tulane and Tulane driving it back. How important is a great university?
I think a great university obviously puts you 5 steps ahead of the game, but when I go to some places, they don't have great universities. What they may have is a lot of private R&D. I was just in Eindhoven, Holland about a month ago, 5th largest city in Holland. And the mayor...
Like beating the 5th highest mountain in Holland.
Well, I know, it's only 750,000.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
But it is like packing a powerful punch, right? Because... And Phillips was there in the late 90s. They left. They lost 36,000 jobs in 2 years. In 15 years, they've doubled employment. What happened? The network came alive. Elected leaders, the universities, investors, VC investors, entrepreneurs, companies. They don't have a world-class university. What they have is private R&D that basically is working in an open innovation, you know, sort of environment, high-tech campus. Everything's bikeable, obviously, in Eindhoven. It's like this campus, actually. So I think folks need to understand what are your assets, what are your advantages. Don't be fanciful. Don't think you're out of the game because, oh my God, they have this, but we don't. No, think about what you have and how to build on that and how to be distinctive and special in this global economy.
Take Memphis, for example.
Sure.
Memphis has...
3 states.
Yeah, 3 states, but it also has an advantage, say, over Kansas City, well, not Kansas, over New Orleans, of having, I think, 7 Fortune 500 corporate headquarters. It also has a river, a downtown, and a heritage, which it lost up until about 20 years ago, when, other than the Peabody Hotel and those silly little ducks, they had nothing downtown. But then they put a minor league baseball stadium, a blues alley. How did that work?
I think Memphis is still struggling, frankly, and I think they did the consumer city quite well. I mean, I love going to Memphis, and once you have that density and urbanity and vitality and vibrancy, I mean, who would not want to go there? At the end of the day, though, it does take productive, innovative industry to basically fuel that, right? And an export-oriented industry, not just FedEx being a switch point for goods coming in from somewhere else and going to somewhere else, but really being a place that makes things or provides advanced services that the rest of the world wants. So we're working with Memphis, we're working with Mayor Wharton, we're working with the business leaders, we're hopeful, but it's never over, right? I mean, you could do 20 or 30 years, as Baltimore did, on basically reclaiming your riverfront, reclaiming your downtown. But then you've got to really focus on the fundamentals. I mean, innovation, education, infrastructure. And you got to do it, frankly, without a national government. Fortunately, Memphis has Bill Haslam, who I think is a good governor of Tennessee, former mayor of Knoxville.
And they're finally doing education reform.
That's right.
Which Baltimore hasn't yet done.
Yes, exactly right. And just so you know, Bill Haslam, governor of Tennessee, former mayor. Governor Hickenlooper, governor of Colorado, former mayor. Yeah. Mayors should run the world, or along with their corporate. I mean, it's a pragmatism. It's place over party. It's collaboration over conflict. The nonsense that goes on to Washington begins to dissipate.
And my last question before we open it up is the personal one, is New Orleans. Tell me about its comeback.
Well, New Orleans, this was a natural disaster of monumental proportions. It was a poor, segregated city and metropolis to begin with. The good news that has happened post-Katrina, though there is still a lot of work to do and no one should be Pollyannish about this, is it lets you throw out the rule book. It lets you really innovate and experiment and imagine in ways that you couldn't do in the pre-Katrina environment. And I would say the same thing for Detroit. I really think Detroit should be a national project. I'm not talking about the federal government.
I mean, Time Magazine made it a national project a couple of years ago.
I think this should be a national project for corporate, civic, university innovators. We should be attracting the best from around the world. We should not tolerate this because there are so many assets in this metro. I mean, it's rich with science and technology. It borders our major trading partner. And we need now to build on the investments of the philanthropic and business leaders. We need to follow their lead.
Questions? Yes. Lisette.
Yes. Lisette Forum. You haven't mentioned Washington, D.C., which is, of course, the seat of so much of your business, our business.
Which city is that?
Washington, D.C. is multiple cities. That's an interesting answer.
No, I have to say, Washington, D.C. has been through a dramatic evolution, and I've only been there for 25 years. Part of it was the smart federal investment. Federal investments do matter to set a regional transit system as a platform for smart growth. The other has been, you've seen an economy that was highly dependent upon the federal government begin to now grow deep private sector roots, obviously in information technology and cybersecurity and life sciences because of National Institutes of Health. Baltimore, for all intents and purposes, is integrated into the Washington economy. There's one thing I will say, and people are never quite happy when I say this. 7 of the 10 most wealthy counties in the United States are in the D.C. metropolis. I think that's a little troubling when 7 of the 10 most wealthy counties are around your nation's capital. I really feel that as we go forward in this country and we diffuse power and leadership basically rises up from the engines of our economy, I'd like to see more and more places around this country begin to grow their wealth.
Yes, right in the middle there. Yeah, stand up.
I gotta stand up, I'm sitting on the floor.
I'll get you the woman back there too next.
I'm Bob Ross, I'm from Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
And in Oklahoma City, the past 20 years, we've had MAPS projects, 1 cent sales tax, the latest one we just passed, is going to do the 4 things more, but these 4 core things all downtown.
Yes.
A convention center, light rail, improvements down in our river, which is at the Oakland River, and, did I say light rail? A park, 75-acre park. Is that the right way to do it?
I think it's an absolutely important part of long-term growth and prosperity. But we don't want to have a field of dreams here, right? Build it and they will come. So we need to understand that as we do smart placemaking, right, we need to do smart economy shaping. We need to do smart talent preparing. We need to walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think for a lot of cities and metropolitan areas, the obvious thing was to focus on downtown revival and waterfront restoration. That is a critical part, particularly given these demographic shifts, the preferences that people have for where they want to live. But let's focus on what fuels the Oklahoma City economy. Let's focus on your trading sector. What do you make? What services do you provide? What do you trade? Who do you trade with? It's like we're going to see a whole network of trading cities emerge this century. I think you've got a strong, incredible base to build on, and now you can move to some of these, to some extent.
Just to pick up on the trading thing, one metric that Brookings used, which I hadn't thought of, which I find fascinating, this was a few years ago, which is how much of the economy is actually bringing dollars in versus the economy that's just circulating dollars inside. Like if Cleveland builds itself a casino, it's not bringing in money the way if New Orleans builds a casino because people go to
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Jane Jacobs wrote in her great book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, the foundation of cities is trade. We forgot that bit. We all thought the foundation of cities was Greenwich Village. Right?
Yes.
Here's the challenge, I think, to the American economy and frankly to the cities and metros that power it. Only 13% of our economy is dedicated to exports because we have looked inward for growth for a very long time, and we basically have embraced a consumption model. Casinos are just at one end of the continuum of that. There are a few cities, Portland, Oregon, we talk about them in the book, which basically doubled exports between 2003 and 2008 because of Intel, computers, and electronics. Portland is not only weird and crunchy, right? They actually do some stuff there. But one thing that Portland is betting on going forward, and you could watch this video, you could download it, called We Build Green Cities, because that's how we think about Portland, really smart development patterns. As China urbanizes, as India urbanizes, as Brazil urbanizes, they need sustainable products and sustainable services so that they can grow their cities in responsible ways. Portland is betting on being one of those centers, probably with Copenhagen and some other places, to basically provide those products and services. So we need to be an export nation because that's how you become rich, that's how you become prosperous, that's how you remain competitive. When you have to compete with everyone else and bring income from outside that you can then cycle around in your metropolitan area. And places like Portland are really at the head of the curve.
Hi, I'm Claire Dewar, and I'm from Dallas, and I love my city, and I see a lot of growth there. But I also see in Texas, in the rural areas, huge growth when you talk about welding in all of this oil field.
Sure.
It's not really manufacturing, but they're doing pipes and they're doing transportation, and I think it's true in North Dakota and I guess Pennsylvania. So, I see in a way a real growth out of the city, at least in Texas. So I'd love your comment on that.
Well, look, we do have a shale gas revolution. It's transforming North Dakota, it's transforming eastern, Ohio, western Pennsylvania, Texas. We have oil exploration, as was discussed in your energy finance panel yesterday. There's enormous energy change going on that will primarily serve the non-metropolitan areas of the United States because of their rich resources. I don't see this as an either-or, frankly, because I see a lot of the technological innovation coming out of the centers, the metropolitan centers of energy, whether it's Houston, whether it's Dallas, whether it's other parts of the South and other parts of the country. So again, it's another one of these divides that we've been sort of brought up to believe are ever-present and structural. But our view is that there are inextricable links and synergies between non-metropolitan and metropolitan America. The shale gas that we're discovering in all parts of this country, and hopefully we'll do it in a responsible way, is fueling part of this manufacturing renaissance that we talked about before. So I don't see division. I see more possibilities of getting beyond some older, not very useful divisions between rural and
Do
metropolitan.
you think North Dakota will develop a metropolitan area?
You know, I think there's an evolution of these things. I mean, I spent a lot of time, I was just in Denver for 3 days. I mean, talking about commodities, right? I mean, think about Denver's economy 3 decades ago. Think about the evolution of this economy over 3 decades. I mean, they have basically traveled the path from being partly an extraction economy and, you know, to being knowledge intensive and talent productive and a magnet really for people all over the world. And so North Dakota should think about its 3 decades of evolution, because that's the way you grow. I mean, if you just rest on your laurels, not a
But
great
also, I mean, the point I was making is that the revolution in shale gas
Yes.
and oil isn't just because all of a sudden there was shale gas and oil. It happened because innovation and technology and 1,000 different inventions over the course of
Absolutely.
8 years made horizontal drilling possible. So that does take a knowledge economy as well.
Takes a knowledge economy. I mean, shale gas is really the end product of an innovation cycle, not even by a lot of the majors, but a lot of the smaller entrepreneurs. So we need to remember that.
Here, I'm saying, lots of questions. You see, you draw a huge crowd and lots of hands. So we will.
Hi, Jane Prizer. In the New York Times today, Moody's reported
Right.
from the state level down to the local municipalities about a $800 billion deficit in pension commitments. That's billions.
Right.
And can you address how that can possibly impact the growth of all these cities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've got, I think in the same article, they also talked about the rising price of infrastructure. So they put all these together. Look, we've got some huge challenges within state and local government around pensions. We've got some huge challenges around infrastructure finance, particularly if when we do tax reform, we remove tax-exempt financing from infrastructure. We need to make some hard choices here. Not everything is the same. I see the political class in states and localities increasingly coming to grips with this. It's gonna, I mean, this is not gonna be pretty, right? But we see it happening in Rhode Island. We see it happening through probably a different mechanism in Detroit. I will just say this, cities are not governments by themselves. And when I look at the Detroit revival, I see very little of it fueled, frankly, by government. The Woodward Corridor Transit, $100 million of corporate and philanthropic investment, and then leveraging up $25 million of federal. That's the new math, right? There's a new bridge coming up across the Detroit River that the Canadians are financing. There's new energy infrastructure that the private sector is financing. So we've got to keep our eyes on the big prize here, which is that cities are networks, and we've got to think about the different roles that different sectors play to get us to these game-changing initiatives. This is a substantial barrier, but my sense is we finally have reached a point where we understand the need to grapple with it.
Hi, Courtney Lord from Aspen and Miami, but used to live in Detroit. So with all the questions, with all the great things happening or beginning to happen in Detroit, 2 questions, basically. One, why is Detroit worthy of outside help as a national project and Kansas City is on its own, which is one statement you made. And the other is how do you bridge the enormous gap of distance of a 10-mile or 15-mile difference between the downtown and where the suburbs exist after the 2 riots of the 50s and 60s that drove people to the exurbs? So
first of all, let me just clarify my comment, or we used to say, what the senators, let me revise my remarks now. Just clarify some comments. I see this as a national project for corporate civic America, not necessarily just for the national government, right? Because I see we're actually working with the governor, Rip, Dan Gilbert, and others on an investment prospectus for downtown and midtown Detroit. So what are the new kinds of investment vehicles? What are the new opportunities that people can grapple with? I mean, residential occupancy in downtown Detroit is around 96% right now. I mean, there's opportunity now for private sector investment. We're sort of catalyzing real markets here. if the federal government, which is in most parts of the country the biggest single investor in cities and metropolitan, they don't know it, they don't know where their money goes, they're sort of an incoherent, chaotic investor. But if they can make their money work better, that would be, that would be very, very helpful. But I see this primarily more for our society than for our national government. And what was the second question?
Disparates,
Oh,
10 miles.
I think what's going to happen in Detroit is the city's going to shrink back. It's 138 square miles. You can throw Manhattan in there, Boston in there, San Francisco in there, and you still have room to add a couple more cities. It's a very large landscape, and as you say, distance is impeding some of the collaboration. But I think we can take some real lessons from the German cities that shrunk back to their cores in the aftermath of the unification of Germany, where there was a huge exodus of people in business from the east to the west. Leipzig, Dresden made some really radical choices about how to shrink to their cores. If we can do that in Detroit and have these areas of opportunity and have other parts of the city be returned to other uses.
But wait, let me challenge that. I see Bob in the back,
Yeah.
too. We had that in New Orleans. The silver lining
Sure.
of the hurricane was it made people have to move back into the core. But it was hard to get people to move back. I know Bob is worried about what do you do with people in the Rockaways, whatever,
Right,
where you want to try to move people. Could you move people back into the core, or do they resist that?
Well, I think there's a vanguard of people are going to make their own decisions about this. Business will make their own decisions. Blue Cross is betting on, a whole bunch of other places are betting on moving back from the suburbs to the core. What I think Detroit now needs, it's sort of ironic in the city of the car, is a 21st century transit system, right? I mean, and we see that with, light rail beginning up the Woodward Corridor. We could take a lesson from Curitiba. We could take a lesson from Bogota. We could do bus rapid transit. If the core grows to the extent that Rip and I believe is its potential, we will unify that region in ways that no government program, frankly, could ever do. Right. And that will begin to lessen the barriers, cultural and other, between the suburbs and the city. But transit, I think transit is a platform for 21st century.
And make it more sustainable. Toby, I'm sorry, there's so many hands, but yeah. Oh, sorry, right, woman there. Oh, well, yeah, thank you. Your hand was up first, so.
I'm Toby, yes.
Yeah, I said Toby, that's right.
I hear you talk about Detroit so much, and I come from Cleveland.
Yes.
Which I've always thought was very similar.
It has a chapter in the book, so buy the book.
I'm going to buy your book. I'm definitely going to. But we have so much going for us. In the different things you've mentioned, we're a hospital center at this point. We certainly need more industry, but we have the transit system, we have the university, we have all kinds of good that we just built a casino. I don't know how it's doing. They're trying everything, and yet we're losing population, and we may lose our one newspaper for that matter. So what do you have to say about that?
So listen, you can't sugarcoat how these Midwestern cities were rocked by this recession. There was subprime lending that went on and devastated neighborhoods, right? And I'm thinking about the east part of the city moving into the suburbs, east, Cuyahoga, right? But at the end of the day, if we're right about the spatial geography of innovation, right, it is about these downtown, midtown corridors. And Cleveland, frankly, looks a lot like Detroit, which looks a lot like Houston, which looks a lot like Atlanta, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In an interesting way, the United States built its cities in very similar patterns as to where they put their large eds and meds, and the role of the downtowns and the proximity to waterfronts, and therefore the potential to grow these vibrant, vital, livable, walkable places, right? That the market seems to demand, just not people, but companies more and more seem to demand. So I would look, the same response I would have to Oklahoma City. A lot of bets were made in Cleveland over the past 30 or 40 years. And it's hard to keep at this. It's really hard to keep at this. But we may have built ourselves a platform for a true urban renaissance in the United States. And that requires, first and foremost, cities and metropolitan areas, as Bob did in New York, to really understand the right kind of game changer that you can invest in, but then also private and civic and university investment that can basically catalyze and leverage this.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Bruce. I'm Derek Thompson from The Atlantic. I grew up in Washington, D.C., where there's a height ceiling of, I think, 170 feet, something like that. Nothing can be built bigger than the Cairo building.
Right.
So the law was passed in the early 1900s to be more like Paris, because we always want to be more like
Right.
Paris. Paris now has 16 commercial buildings taller than any building in Washington, D.C. So Paris doesn't even look like Paris. It's not just Washington, D.C. that has this problem. Rent costs in San Francisco and Austin. To what extent? I mean, from reading you, I've learned the importance of these major cities and the
Yes.
importance of density. And the enemy of density in these cities is the lack of housing supply.
Yeah.
To what extent are we preventing ourselves from having serious revolutions in innovation that you're talking about, from simply not building more multifamily housing in these places?
Yeah, so this is where some of the powers lie at the city and metropolitan level, right? And again, going back to New York City, I mean, the zoning reforms that Bloomberg has pushed through over the past 12 years may be the biggest legacy, right? It's going to densify whole portions of Midtown in dramatic ways that I think most people don't understand. So when you think about building codes, some of which are state, sort of effective, you think about zoning and land use, you think about height restrictions. I mean, these have a huge effect on prices, a huge effect on affordability. I think in the 21st century, cities are going to have to rethink some of these basic tools. Form-based coding. I mean, there's a lot of.
Would you lift the height restriction in Washington?
I probably would lift it around the core. I sort of.
Where's the core?
So you've got Congress to the White House, DuPont Circle, and I mean, that's sort of that envelope, right? I think the L'Enfant plan, we should honor in the core, but DC's bigger than that, and there's whole portions of Southeast and Southwest that we could, I mean, what are we keeping the height restrictions there? So I think there's a compromise here that can be sorted out. If not, it's all going to Roslyn, or it's going to Bethesda, or it's going to Silver Spring. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nicole Nice. My family's also originally from New Orleans, but I've been a Washingtonian now for several years. And I'm wondering if you can speak to how changing demographics are changing cities. So, for example,
Yes.
the mass retirement of baby boomers, influx of immigration. What are the challenges and opportunities presented by those changes?
Yeah, so I really see three big tsunami changes, right? One is the shifting residential preferences of the young. Maybe they just rejected their parents or something. I don't know. I've got two daughters, so I'm talking from real experience here, right? That requires, I mean, what we seem to be getting are market signals from people under the age of, let's say, 30, maybe even 35. We need denser, more walkable, more livable, more transit-rich places where you have options, really, where not everything is separate and segregated from everything else. So that's one big tsunami. And you already see the market effects of this in car sharing and a collaborative space and a mixed-use development. I mean, it's changing real estate in this country, right? Second, the aging of our population. My God, this is going to change everything. It's going to change our innovation platform. It's going to change housing supply. And again, getting back to the mixing of uses so that people living not so much in assisting living facilities, but living in independent situations have greater access to the services that they need. So the aging of the population is also going to change what our federal government spends its money on, because it's going to be a huge shift into Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And that is going to actually go back to the premise of this book, require cities and metropolitan areas to compensate around investments in infrastructure and education and innovation. So the aging is going to, the last is immigration. We are demographically blessed. We should get up every morning and kiss the ground. We are demographically blessed as a country. We need to understand that first and foremost, and because this is the next generation of workers in our country. So the most important thing we need to do as a country is upgrade the education and skills and integrate them into our mainstream. That's the Houston story of our book, chapter 3, I think. 3 big demographic shifts. Demographics is destiny, not Democrats are destiny. Demographics is destiny. So we need to really ride these.
I guess I'm sort of building on a comment made by Claire earlier. A former Speaker of the House for Ohio said to me that he always thought that the biggest challenge in politics was Democrats versus Republicans, but once he became Speaker of the House for Ohio, he changed his position to say the bigger challenge was rural versus urban.
Yeah.
And you did some work, I think it was Restoring Prosperity a few years ago, where I think Ohio was the first state that you took a look at, and you talked about 16 metropolitan communities and the economic impact that they made for the state. Can you talk a little bit about today how you view where that work is going or has gone, and what advice you would give to state policymakers or even governors in terms of the investments that they need to make to keep urban communities vibrant?
So that's a great question. My first advice actually would not be to governors and state legislatures. My first advice would be to city and metropolitan leaders. Get over it. Get over it. You are, 91% of the GDP of this country if we add up all the metropolitan areas. Forget and get beyond the city and suburban divisions. If you come together as city and suburban leaders around issues of infrastructure and education, and there is nothing that will stop you in a state legislature, and there is nothing that will stop you with a governor, because you are 84, 85, 90% of the population and even more of the GDP of your states. So what politicians respond to are coalitions and to power. And we have latent power in our cities and metropolitan areas that has not been exercised because we focus too much on the divisions, not on the similarities. Denver is an example of a place, that basically hated each other from city and suburban level 40 years ago, got over it. It's not that they love each other today, but they know they need to come around the key issues of competitiveness and prosperity. And that's why I think, you see a governor like Hickenlooper, A, getting elected, and B, acting in the service of the cities and metros. So my advice to cities and metropolitan areas, no waiting for Godot here. I mean, we're not waiting for anyone. The power is here. And we now need to organize ourselves differently, form these networks, find our game changers, and then go to the state legislatures and ultimately to Washington and demand what the engines of an economy deserve. All right? I mean, it's not going there with a tin cup, please, may I, couple crumbs off the table. No, we are the country. I mean, we are the country. And therefore, we need to really come together and assert our political power.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We got a, microphone up here.
I'm Donna Zarconi. I'm from Chicago. I'd really like to know who's doing these great networks.
Yes.
Give us some examples. And how are they doing it?
God, Chicago is so rich in networks.
Chicago's the greatest.
I mean, the one thing about Mayor Daley's tenure is he set up the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. And Chicago is, one major city, whole bunch of 14 counties, 554 separate municipalities. It's the 13th century British model brought to the middle of the United States, right? So Daley set up this Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, and they meet 4 times a year. And they really talk about how they can work together on the big issues, right, that really face the region, the environmental issues. What do you do with the airport? Should there be another airport, et cetera, et cetera? But you also have these long-standing civic institutions, like the Metropolitan Planning Council. A lot of these were formed during the New Deal, right? Same in New York, same in some of our other major metros. And they are quintessentially metropolitan. I mean, they talk about the need for workforce housing of the suburbs. They talk for the need for downtown revival. So Chicago is rich in these networks. I love dealing with Chicago because the table's already set. The question is, what are those 2 or 3 things that are game changers that you're going to focus on, given the starting point of the metropolis?
Mm-hmm.
Can I add to that?
Yes, sir.
This is the personal example going the other way. I'm Phil Condit. I was the CEO of Boeing that moved to Chicago.
Right.
Correct.
And what you just said was absolutely crucial.
Yep.
As we looked, the answer we got in Chicago was, we don't care whether you're in the suburbs or downtown. We will work with you to find what works. What we found in most other cities was competition between suburban locations and downtown locations that diluted the effort. And Chicago won on that single issue.
Tell us more about that decision, because when Boeing moved from Seattle to Chicago as a headquarters, it seemed partly because there are a lot of other headquarters in Chicago, so you like being part of a network there. What else went into your decision?
The basic decision was strategic. We had become a company that had big military operation, big aerospace operation in California, St. Louis, Seattle, Houston, Philadelphia. And what we found was we wanted headquarters to be headquarters, not associated with any one element. So that was the strategic choice. That said, you want to be somewhere where you can get to all the places you want to go. The thing I was going to add to your statement is
absolutely.
not
Connectivity.
only local transportation, but
Yes,
transportation
very
in
much so.
general becomes a critical element. Can I get from where I am to where I want to go? So global reach in transportation becomes important. And then all of the peripheral things that you've talked about become extraordinarily important. Is this a vibrant place? You know, little things. We had 450 people that moved to Chicago. The building we were in had 280 parking places. The answer was, this is unworkable. It will not work, because we came from a community that was automobile-centric. We never used the 280 parking spaces. People got on the train and said, oh my God, I can do my email on the way
Absolutely.
in. We had people living in the suburbs, we had people living downtown. We had people loving being downtown because it's walkable. We had people that wanted to be, and that's again, that regional answer that was absolutely crucial.
Sorry, one more.
I'm from the Denver Boulder Innovation Corridor and have been coming to the festival for a long time. And this isn't a question, it's a compliment. This is the best session ever.
Wow.
Thank you.
It'd been even better if Jennifer had been here.
Absolutely.
I guess that's a good way to end. The book, The Metropolitan Revolution by Bruce Katz, Jennifer Bradley, on sale now at our bookstore and bookstores around the nation.
Great.